Laura Dodsworth is here. I'm not going to say Happy Independence Day to you, because it is the Independent Republic of Mike Graham, and every day is Independence Day here, right?
We're always independent thinkers. Every day is an Independence Day for us.
And look at this. She's got a new book out. It's called Free Your Mind. It could not be a better title, because that's what we try to do. Free your mind, because you've got a mind. I've just been talking about how there's a scientist who's done a study who's arguing that actually people are getting stupider. And this is something I've been saying for many, many years, and possibly a decade, that I believe that the human race is actually evolving backwards, and people are becoming thicker and thicker as the years go on.
There's a meme for that, isn't there? You see the evolutionary man going kind of like creature to human, and then someone says, turn round.
That's right. Yeah, we got it wrong. Start again. But there is something about that people are now willing to believe what they're told. They're not as questioning as they used to be. I think they're being educated differently so that they're not really challenging what they're being told. They're accepting the narrative. They're beginning to sort of behave like sheep. And as we've seen in various ways that we're going to talk about today, you know, with the banking business, with the transgender ideology, you know, if you don't think the way you're supposed to think, you know, you're a bad person. You might even be a bigot.
Yeah, we should definitely talk about banks. There's lots to talk about there, because I think you're right. The thing is, I have a lot of faith in people. There's a Dostoevsky quote about this. It's something like, the more I love humanity, the less I love people.
Yes.
I'd be kind of more the other way around. I have a lot of faith in individuals. But the problem is that a lot of authorities and systems now are set up to teach us to be the same.
Yeah.
That's what they, in inverted commas, want. You know,
they don't want individuals.
No, school's about what to think, not how to think. Governments use biases against us all the time in nudge and behavioural science. You know, things like the conformity bias, the authority bias. They want us to all act the same and to obey and do what we're told. And you see it with banks as well. You know, with the kind of, you know, the cancelling of PayPal accounts or people's bank accounts if they're not towing the line, you know, if they're not obeying all of the woke shibboleths. And actually I think this really needs to be resisted, but it starts with you. If you think of humanity's intelligence or society as being like an aeroplane, right now I think it's in free fall. But when it is, the first thing you should do is put your oxygen mask on, because your brain needs to be alert. Actually, that's what that book's about. It's not out to the 20th.
You're not advocating people should wear masks, are you?
No, I'm advocating people should buy my book, Free Your Mind.
We've now gone completely full circle. No!
No, definitely not. But, you know, that's just an analogy. It's out on the 20th.
All the other
analogy
would be, never mind the mask, get a parachute and jump out.
You can think of the book as a parachute if you like. But the thing is, you can't. I think there are two opportunities for us at the moment. If you recognise that a lot of trust in institutions is broken, you know, trust in news is very low. There are two opportunities. One is we rebuild institutions the way we want them to be. But it still has to start with you, the individual. You have to free your own mind. You have to be an individual. You have to be a sovereign of your own mind. So that's what that's about. And, you know, basically, it follows on for the kind of themes that we talk about every week.
We do.
About how people are captured by ideology and groupthink and leaving common sense behind.
Because they're with the crowd, and lots of people feel safe in the crowd. I don't like crowds, I'm afraid. I prefer to be on my own. But let's talk a bit about the crowds in Twitter, because Twitter had a very odd weekend. And I haven't really spoken to anybody about it, because I thought you'd be the perfect person to talk to about the way Twitter works, and you've been on it a long time. You know how it is inside of Elon Musk's head, I suspect, because I wonder...
I'd love to be inside Elon Musk's head. Stop, I wish.
Well, I don't know whether you'd want to be there for long, though, because I think... I hear different stories, but I've heard one of the sort of stories I've heard is he's got rid of so many people now that there's a kind of anarchy in Twitter. And I got to the point where, I think it was Saturday it happened first, and I got this exceeded data thing, this warning. And eventually, after a couple of hours, when I couldn't really read anything, I put out a tweet and said, is anybody else getting this? And it turned out loads of people were, not everybody, but lots of people were getting it. Which meant you basically could only read one tweet at a time. You couldn't read the tweet above or below. You couldn't access an awful lot of people's accounts. It got so bad on Sunday that I couldn't even read my own account. That I'd send out a tweet and I couldn't even see my own tweet.
Crazy times. And the thing is, a lot of people listening to this won't even be Twitter users. And I think, why does everyone bang on about Twitter all the time?
And that's one of the reasons I didn't want to go on about it.
Yeah, but the thing is, why are we talking about it? Well, he cut off our crack supply this weekend, didn't he? It's our social media crack. Hello, my name is Laura, and I am a Twitter addict. You've asked the right person, because yes, it's my natural habitat. Where do you find Laura? On Twitter. Because there's a lot I've really loved about it. You know, it's a very democratic medium. You can talk to anybody, they can talk back to you. I have literally made real-world friends. My first first book, 5 books ago, that only happened because I crowdfunded it and it went crazy on Twitter.
Right.
So there's a lot of good sides to Twitter. One thing I find very frustrating about it, and we've just seen it in action this weekend, is people talk about it being a public square, but it's not. We talk about Twitter because politicians are on there, journalists are on there, influencers. It feels as
governments
though
it's
governments. It feels like it's a kind of a crystal ball for public policy and thinking, and it shouldn't be, because it's not the real world, and yet it's become important. But is it a public square? No, it's more like a labyrinth, and the lights are off, and somebody's got control of walls, and they pop them up and pop them down. Now, a lot of people hoped that when Elon Musk took over, things would get better. I was cautiously optimistic, but I was one of the people that said, well, hang on. He said a couple of things that are very worrying. He talked about freedom of speech and not freedom of reach. Well, they're the same thing. Because if you're talking in a void on your own and no one can hear you, your speech means nothing. There has to be a freedom to be heard. The problem with Twitter has always been, and maybe never more so now, that we don't really know what the rules are. They would deny that they were shadow banning, taking down accounts and reducing the visibility.
But we know that they were doing that.
Well, now we know they were doing it. Now he's admitted they were doing it, but they're still doing it. Now, since he came on in February, I can tell you what's happened to my account. I can't prove that it's an algorithm or there's any wrongdoing, but my followers don't grow. I do something, I get 100 followers, they go over the next day.
They don't grow as much, no.
No, they do not grow. But not only that, it's as though my reach has got a kind of, it's got a limit on it. Oh, this post is only going to be seen by 3,000 people. It doesn't matter how many people retweet it.
I've noticed that my posts are being sent to people who don't follow me more, and many of them disagree with what I say, and so I get a lot more abuse than I used to get, because it's from people who are wondering why they're seeing my tweets. And
the other problem is, of course, if you break the rules in some way, you upset some wokerati at Twitter, or you disrupt some algorithmic rule, you don't know what you've done. It's simply that your visibility is reduced. So you're put on a kind of a naughty step, but you're not told why. So there's no right of appeal. There's no transparency about what's going on. So if it's a public square, this is the worst public square in the world, ruled by a petty tyrant who won't tell us what the rules are. I'm not calling Elon Musk the petty tyrant. And the secret police can come running into the public square and grab you and put you in a dark room and start beating up with a rubber hose without you knowing. You can still talk. You can still talk in your torture chamber, but no one will hear you. Now, I'm not calling Elon Musk the petty tyrant. I think he's got good intentions for free speech. I think so. I think he has, but it's a mess. But you'll also know, I'm sure you will anyway, that there's also an EU rule coming in very soon, which is going to govern Twitter. And some people have said that last weekend was a kind of harbinger, if you like, of that, because he's basically signed up. He said he wouldn't sign up to it, but he now has signed up to the fact that the EU will now effectively govern social media in any country in Europe. Not necessarily because it's part of the EU, but just because it's in Europe. So now Twitter will be slightly less musky and a bit more EU-y. Which is going to be awful. We like a musky Twitter. We do. But the thing is, this is all about the way the people that govern us have a theory of our mind, which is the wrong information mustn't go into it. That's why there's a whole censorship industrial complex. There are fact checkers, misinformation units, truth verifiers. There's a priest caste of truth. There's a truth squad. We know that from the Twitter files. They don't want the wrong information to go into your brain. They don't want you to make decisions. They want you to be a big hive mind. And so the thing is, the internet, the web, social media search, all of these provide genuinely democratic opportunities for people to partake in public discourse, to widen their minds, to broaden their knowledge. But there are some people who are very worried that you don't know what to do with the knowledge. You don't know how to sort the right knowledge from the wrong knowledge. And so that's why we see all these controls at the moment. There's a real technocratic tightening of the net. And you feel it when you're on there all the time. Like I say, I feel my account is squashed. It's like it's being depressed from above by a gigantic bluebird's thumb. Yes, interesting. I like the Truth Squad. I like the sound of that. They're not good. They're not good. You wouldn't like the Truth Squad. No, but I like the name, though. The name's great. Great name for a band. You've been playing around with filters, haven't you? I have, and I'm prepared to humiliate myself publicly on TV. Good. So I did a lot of research for this book. One of the easiest types of research was to spend a lot of time on social media. Comes easy to an addict like me. But I think it's really important to understand how it's affecting our minds. And it's a bit of a squib, but something interesting I thought I'd do is start playing with filters more. So there's this filter on TikTok, which has become quite well known. It's called Body Glamour. And I wanted to send you a before and an after, so you can see what it did to me. This is before, and this is why I'm being so nice. That doesn't do you justice, that. Because well, that's after a run, no makeup. makeup and I haven't brushed my hair.
Okay.
I thought I'd show you like really, really good.
That's totally unfiltered.
That's proper unfiltered.
Which hardly anybody ever uses as a picture of themselves, do they?
Aren't I nice? Aren't I nice sharing this with the wider public? That is Laura with no makeup after a run. And then this is the same location straight after with the body glamour
filter. It's got
filter.
a bit of Sports Illustrated look about it.
Oh my Lord, look at this. Now, this did something weird to me when I did it. I looked at it and I was like, oh, is this what I could look like with really good makeup?
Right.
Holy cow.
Right.
I'm not trying hard enough.
More triangular.
But it did
cheekbones.
It's well done. It's not just makeup. It's not just ridiculously expert makeup. What it's done is change my face shape.
Yeah.
I've got different noses and lips.
Yeah.
And then there's
it used to be called Photoshop. You know, in the old days when I was in magazines and newspapers and things, people would Photoshop everything, particularly cover pictures of models or of film stars or whatever it was, and they would always be Photoshopped because you would just use it because it would make it look like a more attractive person.
And of course, there's nothing new under the sun. Art has always flattered human beings. Go back to any painting, sculpture. There's nothing new under the sun. But I tell you what's different. Once upon a time, if you'd want a portrait painted, you'd have to have some money first of all. The materials were expensive. It was very time consuming. Then come to the more modern day times you and I grow up with, where you had a camera and it was processed using film. And then you get Photoshop, but still there was some effort involved. Well, now it's different. You can machine gun selfie yourself. You can get a burst of 10 photos. Then you pick the best one. That's already a filtering process. The camera has done something to you. It's changed you. The way you look at yourself and angle yourself has changed how you depict yourself. And then you can apply a filter, and these filters are now crazy. So we are changing our own image in a way that we've never done before because it requires no effort. It's totally ubiquitous and everyone's doing it. Now, I'm 50. I'm a Photoshop-wielding photographer. You could even call me
you're a
feminist.
photographer by trade, aren't you?
I was, yeah. And so I am not normally sucked into something like this, but that made me feel a bit funny about myself. I felt when I looked back at the real me that I looked like a real plain Jane.
Right.
And I think, it's not healthy to be using these filters, but they're very ubiquitous. But of course it goes beyond that. People are putting cat's ears on themselves and you go, oh, it's just a bit of fun.
That's very silly.
But do you know that there are hundreds of thousands of what are called furries on Reddit forums?
We did this on Plank of the Week the other day.
The child who identified as a cat, what you need to understand is that's a canary in the coal mine. I put forward a theory in this book that actually, because we're playing with our image, and not just how we look, but how we present ourselves. We always present the best version of ourselves, our successes, our holidays, our good moments. We're not talking about the mundane stuff or the awful stuff. We are becoming the ultimate propagandists. We're self-propagandists. And, frankly, if we're prepared to accept our own lies, why aren't we? Why aren't we prepared to accept other people's lies?
And if everybody else is Photoshopped, why shouldn't you be?
Well, because that also raises the bar.
Right.
It creates a bit of pressure. I interviewed one of our country's most well-known plastic surgeons. He's called Dr. Esho, and he coined a term for it, and it's called Snapchat dysmorphia. So what he found is that people used to come in to him wanting surgery to look like a supermodel or an actress, but they were bringing in their selfies and saying, I want to look like my selfie. So we're ending up in this strange world where people want to look like an artificial version themselves. But he said the filters have gone so far that people are asking for things that are impossible. They want bone structure removed, they want pores removed. And then he said there was another thing that happened in lockdown. People are on Zoom all the time and applying filters to themselves. Did you notice people doing this? So you probably weren't because you were here. But people in meetings would be making their skin look smooth, they've got the kind of tropical backgrounds. And so it wasn't just young people with Snapchat dysmorphia, but a whole middle-aged generation of people wanted to look like their Zoom self. Yes,
it's interesting, isn't it? I am guilty when I did not so much for here, but when I would do interviews sometimes during lockdown, I was at home, and I would have a different background just because I didn't like my own background, so I would put in, I used to do one with the last night of the prom, with a load of Union Jacks being flown, and everybody was like, bigot, just because it would wind them up. Look at it, typical, that's what he has behind him. And it's actually just a fake image, but there we are. Interesting. Let's talk a bit about the COVID inquiry, because I think we haven't seen each other, I've been away. We've had Matt Hancock since the last time I saw you.
Well, I talked about Matt Hancock with Kevin when you weren't here last week. There's another update I'd really like to talk about from the COVID inquiry. I mean, I'm finding it quite upsetting and discombobulating to see what they're not talking about.
Right.
Now, there's a great article in the Telegraph today that I'd urge people to read, based on a report from the Children and Parent Campaigning Group, Us for Them, and they have pointed out that there were 9 times that the government ignored calls not to close schools because of the harms on children, including the risk of mental health problems and suicide. And of course, we know the government did go on to close schools.
Yes, and all of those things did happen.
Over half a year, and exactly. So it's very depressing, to be honest, to hear in the inquiry people like Matt Hancock getting a lot of airtime saying we should have locked down harder and earlier. And this has become the question, why didn't we do it harder and earlier? The real question is, why did we lock down at all?
Yes.
Which went against established pandemic planning.
But nobody's asking that question, as you say, are they?
No. And why did we lock down schools knowing that expert advice was that it would damage children? So there's some stats that have come out about suicide which are incredibly sad.
Well, I know
in 2020, there were 161 suicides in people aged between 10 and 19, but that compares to 34 deaths from COVID. You know, if you think back to the time we were being told anything to save one life, you've got to save one life and save the NHS. But it feels as though children were really sacrificed in this effort. There was no honesty about the impact on them.
So was the NHS, by the way. The NHS was not saved. The NHS was sacrificed on the altar of COVID. You know, so you couldn't get anything done. And I personally know people that have called into this show who told me in the second year, you know, I've got cancer, stage 4 cancer, and they've all said to me, if I could have been seen last year, they could have done something, and now they can't. And those people that called into this show are probably dead now.
Yeah, of course. I mean, we've got, what's the waiting list? 7.4 million we're on now, something.
Well,
I mean,
that's
insane.
that's the small waiting list. The real waiting list is 17 million, because there's another 10 million who have had their first procedure and waiting for a second.
And if you are, I mean, say in my area, the waiting list for CAMS, if you're one of those children with mental health problems, the waiting list is 18 months.
Right.
And then when you get through the treatment, it's not what you'd hope for.
No.
Let's just say that.
Well, you know when things are bad, when you start to talk to people who are telling you stories of friends of theirs whose kids have killed themselves. And I've had about 3 of them in recent memory. I know
young people who've dropped off the school register, who don't go to school anymore, they didn't do their GCSEs, who started self-harming, who got addicted to drugs, all kinds of things in lockdown. And, you know, we're going to feel the impact for a generation. But I want to say that not only did lockdown maybe contribute to mental health problems and ultimately be a factor in suicide, but I think it's worse than that, because there was a report in 2020, and Nadine Dorries talked about it widely. The result of the report was that lockdown hadn't made suicides go up. At the time, I found the report quite concerning, because first of all, it was too early for the report. Existing disaster literature shows that suicides don't go up when you're in the crisis, they go up afterwards. We were still in it. Secondly, it was a small population, a relatively small population of 9 million people. It sounds like a lot, but it's not when you're looking at small numbers like suicide. It was using real-time reporting, but that wasn't comprehensive because it bypassed the full coronial process. And it also compared one time period in one year with a different time period in another year. So it wasn't really an accurate comparison. And at the time, everyone wanted to latch onto it, probably because they had the best intentions. They didn't want to think what they were doing might kill people. But they said, this is proof that lockdowns aren't causing suicide. It was too early for that report. And I think we're seeing a different picture.
Because they wanted it to be true. Like so much around COVID, much of the messaging was all about what they wanted it to be rather than what it actually was. And they haven't learned that lesson yet. And
yet school closures aren't in Module 1 of the inquiry, which is disgraceful. That should be front and centre for this inquiry.
You would have thought.
The impact on children and education.
And it also
that's our country's future.
Shouldn't be forgotten that nobody in politics stood up against it, and in fact quite the reverse. You know, nobody said, because a lot of the schools actually were told, if you want to stay open, you can. And I've spoken to head teachers who kept their schools open to a larger extent than not, because they knew that their kids, particularly inner city kids, would be much worse off if they weren't coming into school every day. And so they actually fought that. And a lot of schools were told, we recommend that you close. And so they did, you know, which is awful. We're nearly at the end.
Banks. Because it's hit the news this week that Nigel Farage's bank account was closed. He couldn't open another one.
It turns out he's not alone.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people are jumping on this really quite gleefully. Now, I'm not a friend of Nigel Farage. I've got no skin in the game here, but I think we should be worried when anyone's bank account is closed. And there are people saying, this is great, we want banks to have more of a social conscience. But I don't think they're really thinking about what a slippery slope this is. First of all, banks have quite a lengthy sin sheet themselves. Does anyone remember the subprime mortgage crisis in 2008?
What, you mean the one that we rescued them with taxpayers' money from?
We rescued them while people were made homeless.
Yeah.
I mean, this is disgraceful. That's a true ethical quandary. You know, we've had a vicar losing his bank account for speaking out about LGBTQ plus stuff. Any of Toby Young's accounts at PayPal were shut down.
It turns out a lot of people in the Brexit Party were attacked this way a couple of years ago. They just didn't make much of a fuss about it.
Do you know what happened to Us for Them, that children's campaigning group? So if you don't uphold the woke shibboleths of the day, you can have your money supply cut off. Now, the thing is, you can't really participate in society without a bank account. I actually think that not only should they have to potentially provide a very rigid and long notice period, which is one of the recommendations coming from politicians, and be totally transparent about what can get you to that state, I think it should go further. I think it should be a civic right. Everyone should have the right to a bank account. Because how can you be in this world without a bank account? We can't just eject people because we don't like what they have to say. You know, we already have laws. We have a police system, we have a judiciary system, we have a penal system. If somebody breaks the law, there are ways of dealing with it. We don't have to cut off their money too. And you never know when it's going to, you know, where's this going to go? When are they going to change
Maybe we
mind?
need a people's bank.
Nigel Farage one day, who is it the next day? I don't want banks to have a social conscience particularly, except in regards to how they conduct their own business.
They've all signed up, would you believe, to the Stonewall principles of gender inclusivity, and that's partly why this is all happening.
Which brings us to this other hilarious story about the Bank of England. Because the Bank of England has talked about upgrading all of its toilets to unisex. Now, this is no upgrade in my mind. I hate unisex toilets. I'm sorry, men. I'm sorry, men. You're all right. I just don't want to share the loos with you.
Yeah, but then
I
you
like
get
the
other
ladies' loos.
Well, it's the same with the train. It's a gender-neutral toilet. It's on the plane. It's a gender-neutral toilet.
Yeah, I don't like using them. I'd still rather have a ladies' loo.
Well, also, it's not really a toilet. It's a cubicle in a moving vehicle. It's not really a toilet. Let's face it.
They don't have space for big ladies' suites with toilets and mirrors and lovely hand-washing facilities. No, but it's not just that. The Bank of England has encouraged people to use gender pronouns on emails. And also staff have got equality and inclusion targets in their personal targets at work, their professional targets at work. It's providing gender affirmation care through private healthcare. I mean, I really have a less of an issue with that. If people want to pay for it, that's one thing. But it does a little bit concerning, because you think you'd like the people ultimately in charge of the purse strings to have some kind of grip on reality. And I have to be honest, I feel a little bit suspicious when I deal with people that have pronouns and it's quite obvious what sex they are. So just that alone doesn't really inspire you with much trust. I think working at the Bank of England sounds like hell. Having to announce your pronouns, have diversity inclusions in your professional targets, and unisex toilets.
And not calling anybody a father or a mother. Amazing. And also, just do your job, you know. Stop inflation from rising every 5 bleeding minutes, and maybe we'll give you another go.
Well, they're too busy thinking about all this other stuff, which is not what we want them to be thinking about at all.
Conflating, not inflation. I've been told to hold up your book again. Here it is. Free Your Mind. Available at all good bookshops?
It's available for pre-order at Amazon, all good bookshops, out on the 20th.
Alison Pearson says, an instant classic. If you like quirkily brilliant work of Malcolm Gladwell, you'll love this book. I'm buying it for all my friends. Well, there you are.
We have got some nice
Maybe Alison
quotes.
will buy me one then.
Maybe I will give you a signed copy
That
next
would be
week.
lovely.
How about that?
That would be excellent.
Yeah.
And then we can take a picture.
Your mine's already free, but
it is free.
I think you'll enjoy it anyway.
But it's quite expensive if you want to own it.
It's not.
That's another story.
It's not expensive. It's the price of a couple of coffees.
That's not what they say in this building. Anyway, thank you so much for coming in, Laura Dodsworth. We haven't seen her often enough lately.